7 African generals in full-dress uniforms, a closed room, and a sealed letter waiting. It smelled like a trap. Even though they called it a unification meeting, President Ibrahim Traore wasn't merely protecting Burkina Faso when he entered that room. He was going to face a covert military coalition willing to give up African independence in exchange for foreign cash. They issued a directive to him. None of them anticipated what he offered them. The true question is whether or not their own leaders will support the people when they stand up for what is right, or turn them into silent supporters. The meeting room had the stench of treachery, stale cologne, and leather seats. 7 African generals sat in quiet behind the heavy Rico's blue drapes in Dar es Salaam, acting as gatekeepers rather than allies. Every man had wounds from battles they could never fully describe and scars on his shoulders prior to speaking their native tongues. The majority of them were Western military grads, Sir Sanders Fort Benning guys who had trained to salute in French. It was formally a regional stability meeting. Informally, it served as a tribunal. The subject, a 35-year-old Burkina Faso captain, is far too daring, unbought, and dangerous for the established system. Ibrahim Traore was no longer merely a leader in transition. They were already referring to him as a symbol that frightened them in whispers across the markets and barracks. Nigeria's General Adir studied the final draft of the ultimatum while sipping coffee. Côte d'Ivoire General Ouattara nervously tapped his cane. They all felt the same, but none of them wanted to be the first to acknowledge it out loud. When someone talked about sovereignty as if it were oxygen, the goal was no longer secure. They had tried to remain silent, but Traore had shut down French military bases, begun hoarding gold, disobeyed CFA orders, and even, God forbid, announced that Africa must stand alone or never stand at all. They attempted to use slander. They would now attempt unification. Traore would either submit to their collective will or be broken. The generals agreed. Under the guise of cooperation, the invitation was sent, but there was something chilly and antiquated inside the seal. Fear masquerading as etiquette. They hoped the captain would be foolish enough to go into the trap. The urgent Pan-African Defense Dialogue letter, sealed in gold trim, arrived. It used elegant, diplomatic language and made promises of regional cooperation, unity, and peace. But Ibrahim Traore had read too many of them to accept the idea nevertheless. He went because he wanted to meet their gaze, not because he trusted them. The lovely Dar es Salaam was a beautiful location designed to suppress opposition. As he entered, 7 generals stood by, each rising slowly. They gave him a brotherly greeting, but their hands were icy. A leather folder was held out across the table by General Adabi. No masks, no prelude. The statements were straightforward. Traore had 30 days to announce his resignation. In return, they would guarantee a smooth handover, no penalties, no violence. They discussed investor confidence, stability, and averting civil instability. However, every word of offshore accounts and foreign ink. General ULTIMATUM murmured, "You've become inconvenient," without even looking him in the eye. These weren't warriors anymore, Traore said, surveying the room. They were marketers for stillness who had forgotten the sound of loyalty on buying they had made, pledges to foreign powers that were hidden under their ribbons. The room briefly fell into a dense, unnatural silence as a result of Traore's refusal to bow, endangering the balance of both power and profit. Then, Traore stood, his voice not rising, not trembling, but each phrase landing like a match in dry grass. "You wanted me to give up so you could keep reselling parts of Africa under different names. Not for peace." Some people's eyes narrowed, others turned their heads away. Putting his hand on the folder, Traore said, "You didn't call me to a peace summit. I was invited to my own funeral by you." Then he grinned. "Let's start the eulogy, shall we?" Traore didn't have to speak. His presence accomplished what a room full of metal couldn't. Quietness pushing the ultimatum folder away. He stood carefully as though he were rising for the sake of all the villages left in darkness, while their minerals illuminated foreign cities. Not just for himself. Africa is not impoverished, he said, fixing the generals with his gaze. Every day in plain daylight, she is being plundered with our permission. The space became stifling. He mentioned firms who had oil contracts in Chad but had not constructed any roads, as well as companies that were mining lithium in Mali while schools were collapsing. Europe was powered by French and Canadian companies that exported uranium from Niger, while NAM experienced blackouts. Burkina Faso gold sparkles in Geneva and Dubai. However, my people use corroded wells to drink. each syllable cut through the strata of meticulously constructed quiet. He was criticizing, not speculating, saying, "Do not call it partnership when we wear the uniform and they hold the leash. Do not call it aid when they take 10 and return 1. While one general shuffled in his chair and another tapped his fingers to conceal his tremble, Traore went on, "They fear our awareness, not our guns, because the empire pauses when the African child discovers she was never shattered. At birth, nobody breathed. I destabilize, you say. No, gentlemen, lies are undermined by truth. Dependency is destabilized by dignity. There was nothing left to hide behind now that you had mistaken your foreign pensions for peace." He stated that if I were to be removed for expressing this, I should step back and let them do it publicly, but I will not die with their gold in my mouth. No flag, no title, and no anthem could overshadow the weight of what he had said. He was met with silence. Traore took a step forward, his eyes piercing the dense air like a dagger through silk. He held no notes in front of him, just his hands bare and unflinching. "You label me careless." He responded in a stern voice. "Sankara was as well. Lumumba was also. It was because they dared, not because they failed." General Adabier's visage flickered. He had received training in Belgium. Thomas Sankara advised us to produce what we eat, even though he was aware of the truth of Lumumba's death, but had never revealed it out loud. He was buried in a borrowed casket as a result. According to Patrice Lumumba, "Our land is not for sale." His body was discovered, but his teeth were missing. The quiet grew more intense. Nobody interrupted. They were not flawless, but their intentions were pure, and as a result, they were silenced not by gunfire, but by treachery while wearing uniforms that resembled ours. Red blinked cameras concealed under fake potted plants. Traore's assistant was streaming the speech. The generals had consented to recording in the hopes that it would document his submission. Rather, it was documenting his disobedience. "I speak so history won't wonder where I was while Africa bled, not to persuade you," Traore continued. He raised his chin. "The tree they attempted to burn when they killed Sankara is the one that may be watered by my blood if I fall. When Lumumba screamed in a cage, they strangled the same tree. That tree is living. Every child who learns the anthem, but not the chains, develops it. The room remained the same. The males did what had begun as a discussion about peace was changing. Not yet a revolt, but a reckoning in each man that had to make a choice." He approached the far end of the table, took a rolled-up map out of his coat, and laid it across the polished wood, smoothing it with his palm like a surgeon revealing a wound. Was he the ghost or the grave Traoré? It was a map of foreign military installations rather than borders. He pointed to U.S. drone installations in odds at this point. French command positions in Somalia's Gao, Turkish training grounds, Chinese coastside naval ports. Each one is ideally situated away from famine areas and schools, but close to mines, oil fields, and gold. They say the West protects us, he added as the group looked in uncomfortable quiet, but they build bases near our minerals, not our mothers. They provide firearms instead of respirators. Who are they trying to protect? He took out another sheet with airspace infractions. On it, drones, special operations, surveillance, and craft helicopters flying over Africa without permission, no condemnation, no indignation. Not even a word from EOAs. Would a Birkin drone flying above Paris go unnoticed? In your opinion, a couple? Generals looked at each other. Despite clearing his throat, one remained silent. "They are not here because we are weak. Rather, they are here because we are wealthy, albeit not in our own pockets." Traore insisted, "You call it partnership. I call it occupation, not by force, but by invitation." He challenged each man to flinch by looking them in the eye. He tapped the table. One sharp final said, "They talk about counterterrorism, but the terrorists usually come after the contracts are signed. They say they protect us from chaos. But what if chaos is the price they pay to keep Africa on its knees?" Traore paused, allowing the silence to settle like dust. Before reaching into his jacket and taking out a slim folder bound in plain cloth, he placed it on the table with quiet finality. I repeated the question, "Whose security are they defending?" But no one responded, and the silence spoke louder than any treaty ever signed. He said, "You came here expecting my surrender, but I'm bringing a blueprint.